At 16, he mopped floors in a factory that didn't even know his name. At 36, he signed the papers that made him the owner of that same factory. This is not a movie. This is not luck. This is what happens when a man refuses to let his circumstances write his story. Meet Daniel Hart, a 16-year-old boy from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, a city built on steel, sweat, and working-class pride. His father, Gerald Hart, had spent 22 years as a line worker at Crestfield Manufacturing, a mid-sized metal parts factory on the edge of town. His mother, Patricia Hart, worked the front desk at a local dental office. Daniel had one younger brother, Noah, who was quiet and bookish. They lived in a narrow row house with a leaking basement and a furnace that rattled every winter. Nobody in the Hart family had ever owned anything bigger than a used car. But Daniel had a feeling, deep, stubborn, and impossible to explain, that his story was going to be different. What drives a teenager to walk into the same factory his father worked in, not to follow his father's path, but to eventually own it? The summer Daniel turned 16, his father Gerald pulled a favor with the floor supervisor at Crestfield Manufacturing and got Daniel a part-time job. The role was simple: general labor, sweeping floors, moving material crates, cleaning machine stations. The factory was loud, hot, and relentless. On his first day, Daniel wore the same steel-toe boots his father had worn for 10 years, resoled twice, scuffed beyond recognition. A veteran worker named Big Ray looked at the boots and said, "Those boots been here longer than most of the managers." Daniel laughed. But he never forgot that line. It told him everything about who truly built this place and who got the credit. Daniel spent that entire first summer watching, not just working, and what he noticed on those factory floors quietly became his education. Most teenagers in Daniel's position would clock in, do the minimum, and clock out. Daniel did something different. Between sweeping runs and crate moves, he watched everything. He watched how the machines were set up and broken down. He watched which supervisors the workers actually respected and which ones they quietly despised. He watched where materials were wasted, where time was lost, and where the floor slowed down. He kept a small spiral notebook in his back pocket, and every night, after his shift, he'd sit at the kitchen table and write down what he observed. His dad would walk by, glance at the notebook, and just shake his head with a small smile. He didn't understand it yet. Nobody did. That little notebook, filled with factory observations from a 16-year-old's eyes, would become one of the most valuable documents in Daniel's life. Deep in Crestfield's machine room worked a man named Frank DeLuca, a 58-year-old machinist who had forgotten more about manufacturing than most engineers ever learn. Frank had spent 30 years on factory floors across Ontario and was considered the most technically skilled person in the building. He was also deeply bitter, passed over for promotions, underpaid, and invisible to management. When Frank noticed Daniel watching his machine set up one afternoon with genuine curiosity, he didn't chase him away. He waved him over. "You want to know how this works, or are you just standing there?" Daniel pulled out his notebook. Frank looked at it. Then he smiled for what felt like the first time in years. Frank DeLuca became Daniel's first real teacher, and what Frank taught him went far beyond machines. Every Friday afternoon, Frank would spend his 30-minute break teaching Daniel something new: how to read mechanical blueprints, how to identify inefficiencies in production cycles, how to calculate material waste percentages. Frank had never had children. He had never had a student. For the first time in decades, his knowledge had somewhere to go. He told Daniel things he had never told management. This factory loses 18% of its raw material to poor process design. Nobody upstairs cares because the profits still look okay. But okay is the enemy of great. Daniel wrote every word down. He didn't fully understand all of it yet, but he filed it away with the patience of someone who knew the information would matter eventually. Frank gave Daniel a blueprint, not for a machine, but for how a factory should actually be run. And Daniel never forgot a single line. When Daniel graduated high school at 18, everyone assumed he'd go to university. His grades were strong. His teachers recommended engineering programs. His mother, Patricia, had quietly saved a small fund for tuition. But Daniel made a decision that shocked his family. He turned down the university path and took a full-time permanent position at Crestfield Manufacturing. The room went silent at dinner when he announced it. His father stared at his plate. His mom's eyes filled up. Noah didn't say anything. Daniel calmly explained that he wasn't giving up. He was going in. He enrolled in night courses in business administration and industrial management at a local college while working days at the factory. He was going to learn this industry from the inside out. While his classmates were in university dorms, Daniel was working 10-hour factory shifts and then sitting in night classes, and the gap he was building was invisible but massive. Over the next 8 years, Daniel climbed every single level of Crestfield's floor operations. At 19, he became a certified machine operator. At 21, he was promoted to line lead. At 23, he became a shift supervisor, overseeing 22 workers on the afternoon production run. At 25, he was appointed floor operations manager, the youngest in the factory's history. Every promotion came with more responsibility and more insight into how the business actually ran. He could now see the full picture: costs, contracts, client relationships, supply chains. And with every new level he reached, his notebook got thicker, his understanding sharper. His plan, the one he hadn't fully told anyone yet, got more concrete. By 25, Daniel knew exactly what was wrong with Crestfield, and he also knew exactly how to fix it. The question was, would anyone ever let him? At 26, Daniel presented a full operational improvement proposal to Crestfield's owner, Douglas Whitmore, a 67-year-old businessman who had inherited the factory from his own father and run it on autopilot for years. The proposal covered waste reduction, production cycle optimization, and a restructured shift model that Daniel projected would increase output by 23% within 18 months. Douglas listened politely, nodded, said he'd think about it, then did absolutely nothing. 3 months passed, then 6. Daniel followed up twice. Both times, Douglas deflected. An older manager told Daniel quietly, "Dad doesn't want to fix the factory. He wants to sell it eventually and retire. He just doesn't know who to sell it to yet." Daniel's blood went cold, then warm with realization. The owner wanted to sell. Daniel had no money, but what happened next proves that preparation and timing are more powerful than capital. That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the same table he'd sat at as a teenager, writing factory observations, and wrote a single sentence at the top of a fresh page: "I'm going to buy Crestfield Manufacturing." Then he spent the next 6 months building the most detailed business acquisition plan he could construct. He took his night course notes, his decade of factory observations, Frank DeLuca's operational teachings, and combined them with research into small business acquisition financing, SBA equivalent, Canadian lending programs, and private investor structures. He called his old night school professor Carl Briggs, who had become a mentor, and laid out the entire plan. Carl said one thing: "Daniel, this is not crazy. This is actually very possible. Let me introduce you to someone." Carl Briggs made one phone call, and that single introduction changed the entire trajectory of Daniel Hart's life. Carl introduced Daniel to Margaret Ewan, a 52-year-old retired manufacturing executive turned private investor based in Toronto who specialized in worker-led business acquisitions. Margaret had seen dozens of people try to buy businesses they worked in. Most failed because they were emotional, underprepared, or both. When she sat across from Daniel and he laid out his factory notebooks, 20 years of observations, operational data, financial projections, and a clear turnaround strategy, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You know this factory better than its owner does. That's either terrifying or brilliant." She asked for 2 weeks to review everything. 14 days later, she called Daniel and said 4 words: "I'm in." "Let's talk numbers." With an investor on board, Daniel now had to do the hardest thing of all, walk into Douglas Whitmore's office and make an offer on the factory he swept floors in. At 29, Daniel requested a formal meeting with Douglas Whitmore. He walked into the same executive office he'd once been too intimidated to knock on, wearing a proper suit for the first time in his life, and placed a professionally bound acquisition proposal on the desk. Douglas stared at it, then stared at Daniel. "You want to buy my factory?" Daniel held eye contact. "Yes, sir, and I think I can show you why my offer is the right one." Douglas leaned back in his chair. He had received 2 other expressions of interest from outside buyers in the past year. Neither had come with the depth of operational knowledge Daniel's proposal contained. Douglas didn't say yes that day, but he didn't say no. He said, "Give me 30 days. Those 30 days were the longest of Daniel's life, and what happened on day 28 nearly destroyed the entire deal. On day 28, Daniel found out through a trusted colleague that a private equity firm from Toronto had submitted a competing offer for Crestfield, significantly higher than Daniel's bid. The PE firm planned to buy the factory, gut the workforce, automate heavily, and flip it within 5 years. If they won, the factory floor workers, including Daniel's own father Gerald, still working there at 62, would almost certainly lose their jobs. Daniel couldn't match the price, but he could do something. The PE firm couldn't. He could make a human argument. He requested an emergency meeting with Douglas. This time he brought something he'd never brought before. He brought Gerald Hart, his father, to sit beside him in that office. A father and son sitting across from the man who held both their fates. What happened in that room, nobody on the factory floor expected. Gerald Hart had never been in Douglas Whitmore's office in 22 years of working at Crestfield. He sat straight in the chair, hands folded, wearing his cleanest shirt. Daniel presented a revised proposal, not just financial, but legacy-focused. He outlined a worker retention commitment, a community reinvestment model, and a 5-year growth plan that would add jobs rather than cut them. Then Gerald spoke, quietly, steadily, about what this factory had meant to their family, their neighborhood, and the 67 workers currently on that floor. Douglas Whitmore, a man known for being unmoved, looked down at his desk for a long moment after Gerald finished. When he looked up, his eyes were different. He said, "Let me think overnight." That night, Douglas Whitmore made a decision that no spreadsheet, financial model, or outside investor could have predicted. At 7:14 a.m. the next morning, Daniel's phone rang. Douglas Whitmore's voice was calm and direct. "I'm going with your offer, Daniel. Not because of the money, because of what you walked in here with. That's what I want this factory to be when I'm gone." Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, phone pressed to his ear, unable to speak for a full 10 seconds. When he finally managed words, they were quiet. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret this." He hung up, sat still for another minute, then walked to the kitchen where his mum, Patricia, was making coffee, and told her. Patricia Hart put down her coffee mug, walked to her son, and held his face in both hands the way she did when he was 5 years old. No words, just that. The deal wasn't done yet. Closing a business acquisition takes months of legal and financial work, and Daniel was about to face his toughest test yet. The acquisition process took 7 months of legal negotiations, financial due diligence, bank financing arrangements, and investor structuring with Margaret Ewan. There were moments where the deal nearly collapsed. A title dispute over factory equipment, a lender who pulled back funding at the last minute, and a 2-week period where Daniel genuinely didn't know if it was going to happen. He lost weight. He barely slept. His brother Noah flew in from Vancouver and stayed with him for a week just to make sure he was okay. Through all of it, Daniel kept showing up. To the law office, to the bank meetings, to the negotiations, with his notebook, his data, and the same steady calm he'd developed on the factory floor. Eventually, every obstacle resolved. The closing date was set. On the morning of the closing, Daniel did something before signing those papers that made everyone in the room go completely silent. On the morning of the acquisition closing, before driving to the lawyer's office, Daniel went to the factory floor. It was 5:45 a.m. Shift change. Workers were arriving, punching in, getting their stations ready. Daniel walked through the floor in his suit, out of place, conspicuous. Workers looked up. Some nodded. His father Gerald was already at his station. Daniel stopped in the middle of the floor and looked up at the ceiling, the same ceiling he'd looked up at as a 16-year-old sweeping this floor in his father's old boots. He stood there for 2 full minutes. Then he walked out, got in his car, drove to the lawyer's office and signed his name to every document without hesitation. When the last page was signed, the room applauded. Daniel looked at Margaret Yuen and simply said, "Now the real work starts." Daniel Hart was now the owner of Crestfield Manufacturing, and what he did in the first 90 days shocked everyone who had ever underestimated him. Daniel's first act as owner was to call an all-hands meeting with every single employee, all 67 of them, in the factory's loading bay. He stood on a crate so everyone could see him. He told them where the company stood financially, what the plan was, what would change, and what would stay the same. He promised no layoffs for the first year. He promised profit sharing would be introduced within 18 months. He promised open-door communication, something Crestfield had never had before. Workers who had been skeptical, guarded, and tired of being invisible stood a little straighter. Frank DeLuca, now 72 and still somehow on the floor as a consultant, caught Daniel's eye from the back of the crowd and gave him one slow nod. That nod meant everything. With the team aligned, Daniel implemented his improvement plan, and the numbers that came back in month 4 stunned even Margaret Yuen. Within the first year, Daniel implemented every efficiency improvement he had been planning for nearly a decade. Waste dropped by 21%, production output increased by 19%, on-time delivery rates went from 78% to 96%. 3 major clients who had been considering leaving Crestfield renewed their contracts, 2 at higher volume. The factory turned its first profit under Daniel's ownership in month 9, 2 months ahead of projection. Margaret Yuen called him after seeing the quarterly numbers. "I've invested in 11 businesses," she said. "This is the cleanest first-year turnaround I've ever seen." Daniel thanked her. Then he hung up and sat quietly for a moment, thinking about a 16-year-old kid with a spiral notebook and his father's old boots. The turnaround was real, but Daniel's most important decision as owner had nothing to do with numbers, machines, or profit margins. At the 18-month mark, Daniel introduced the Crestfield Profit Share Program. Every full-time employee received a percentage of quarterly profits based on tenure and role. In the first distribution, the average floor worker received an additional $2,200. For many of them, it was the first bonus they had ever received in their working lives. Gerald Hart, still on the floor at 63, now as a senior line advisor, received his share like everyone else. He didn't cash it right away. He framed the statement and hung it in his workshop at home. Daniel also launched the Crestfield Apprenticeship Program, a partnership with 2 local high schools to bring in teenagers from working-class families for paid factory training. The first class had 8 students. One of them reminded Daniel so much of himself it was almost hard to look at. Daniel Hart had come full circle, but the moment that truly defined everything came on a quiet Tuesday morning 2 years after he bought the factory. Today, Daniel Hart is 36 years old. Crestfield Manufacturing employs 94 full-time workers, up from 67, and has expanded into a second facility in Brantford, Ontario. Annual revenue has grown by 340% since acquisition. Gerald Hart retired on his own terms at 64 with a pension supplement. Daniel quietly set up without telling him until the check arrived. Patricia Hart volunteers with the company's community outreach program. Noah Hart handles the company's legal affairs from Vancouver. Frank DeLuca's portrait hangs in the factory's front lobby with a plaque that reads, "The man who taught us what good really looks like." And on Daniel's desk beneath a glass paperweight sits a worn spiral notebook, the first one. From when he was 16, filled with the handwriting of a boy who was already building something nobody else could see yet. He started by sweeping the floors. He ended up owning them. The only difference between Daniel Hart and every other worker in that factory was a notebook, a plan, and the courage to never stop believing the plan.